Hi, I'm Mark Rosano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. So today we have our econ show. A lot of stuff to talk about, a lot of new data sets that have come out, and we want to go through what does it mean. Obviously, there's people are changing their narrative based on price action, but is price action really where the economic data is pointing us? And those are some I think important things that we really want to touch on and some of the drivers behind it. So we're going to break it into pieces. And there was a really good chart that showed, what are some of your number one fears going into this year? And the cost of living crisis was, I think, a big one. And that's where, so we want to talk about why are people worried about cost of living? How is that going to dictate things going forward? So we're going to talk about that, what's happening on the food front, how is that starting to come to pass. Then we want to look at the leading indicators in the U.S. and the data doesn't show a Fed pivot. Like yes, there's been some slowdown in year-over-year inflation, but core inflation still running heavy. You still have some pretty positive jobs data. That none of that shows. The Fed's going to pivot. Yeah, it's again we still believe that that is a long way away. And then we want to look at within that also where some of the leading indicators are in terms of that economic growth. And then we're going to follow that with small business data, which turned negative again. It's still right at the lows, one of the lowest it's ever been since its inception. And where is that in housing? How is that continuing on the real estate front? Then we want to look at Europe, where economic data continued to improve. We did get a nice little bounce, but wage growth got worse. And so again, you still need that consumer, and we want to kind of weigh, is the economic data getting better because we're bouncing off the lows, or is it something where last year was just that terrible, so this year looks better, but really not as good? And then in the final segment, we're going to look at China's reopening and why, again, that is completely, it's the market's giving it a lot of credit, even though there's, what are they reopening into? They're reopening into a global slowdown, a global recession. So yes, things will get better, but we really need to pare back. I think what is getting better? How is that going to continue? And then as we've been talking about Japan and India, we want to talk about Japan, what's happening there, and some of the issues that have continued to come about. So with that being said, this is the top global risks in 2023. And I know for myself, I would say that most of these things are right in line. And selfishly speaking, when we created our C6 private equity fund, we saw in 2019 an energy crisis. We saw an inflation crisis. We saw food supply problems, and everything that we've invested in is to address this. So I think it takes time for people to kind of come to terms with what is to come. And now that it's here, I think that these are real problems that are not going away anytime soon. And that's why when we talk about the 70s is a great period to compare us to, just because the energy supply crisis did not go away in a year. Like, even though obviously you had the embargo, then that the embargo was lifted, there were still ramifications and problems that came on the back end of it. And Russia-Ukraine is not ending anytime soon. There's a lot of issues that continue with the energy supply side, which impacts how much electricity do we have? How much power do we have? How much diesel do we have? Can we mine copper, aluminum, iron ore, things that we need for daily life? And if you don't have enough, well, that creates a cost of living problem. If you can't get things affordable, well, that means that your cost of living is going to go up. The things that you take for granted, which is why we talk so much about core inflation, sticky inflation, because these are things that are impacting those cost of living problems, which then is all driven by rising inflation. And rising inflation is a big piece of the food supply crisis. So the food supply issue, which we're going to talk about at the end of this segment, has not improved. There is still a problem. There's still shrinking in terms of the problems that we have. I mean, there's been more bird flu. creating the egg inflation. Though there's so many different pieces of it. And then as I think what most people can talk about, and when I was at Bloomberg, one of the big things that we did was IoT and looking at, cyber attacks on infrastructure, soft targets was a lot, very low hanging fruit. And I think you're starting to see that come to pass. But the one thing that I want to highlight is where people view climate change and the failure to set and meet national net zero targets. It's up there, but not where it should. It's moving further down. And I think that's a big component when you start weighing where people are looking at different things. And the one piece here that I think when you start to see some of these pivots, the debt crisis. We have talked aggressively about Japan, how the BOJ only had one option, which was to raise the ceiling, and that the market was going to push them to do it. And it came to pass, and it's continuing. There is a debt problem out there. It still exists in China that has not gone away. It continues in Japan, and now in the U.S. we have a big backdrop of things to come when you look at the new debt ceiling. What does the debt ceiling look at? Again, we'll raise the debt ceiling. I don't think that's the issue. It's just, what do we have to give up? And is it something that we're going to shut down the government again and not pay bills because we're going to use that as a tactic and tool? And these are some key risks that I think are important to look at because they're not going away. And all of these things impact people's lives to a very big degree. Cyber attack on critical infrastructure, we saw it with Colonial Pipeline. The debt crisis is something that I think you're going to continue to see that move up. And the disruption in global supply chain, that will start to move down. So you're going to get some of these readjustments. But I think these 4 or 5 big ones are really not going away. And that's going to be a big problem going forward. So, the graphic summarizes the findings from the Global Risk Report, providing an overview of most pressing global risk world in the different areas. And just to summarize it, in the U.S., there's not going to be a soft landing. We're on track for a third straight quarter of declines in real retail sales alongside 2 successive negative production numbers. And again, these are things that only happen in recessions. Not to say that we're going to go down 15%, because we've been saying from the beginning, the U.S. is going to be down, let's call it, 3%, 2 to 3%, but we're going to stay down. And a lot of these problems are going to be very sticky when we look at where things are going and how that's going to progress on not only just the global front, but also on the U.S. front.